I don't know about you, but when I think of my favorite adventure movie, they are epic, they are huge, but they're always about some huge journey, right? There are a group of people journeying together, protecting each other. Now, while Avengers is what most likely comes to mind, a couple of years ago, I read the Lord of the Rings books. Obviously, there's movies along with it, but what I was struck with is in these books, just like the movie, these journeys and adventures and trials can't be done alone. Mordor is too big, and the Upside Down is way too creepy, and time travel is just too hard. All those things are too hard to do on their own. But the same can be said of our faith journey, right? It can't be done alone. You need people to walk alongside you. And although you can't always choose what happens in life, you can choose who you journey with. So last week we talked about how knowing and following Jesus is the greatest adventure, the greatest journey that we can take. And spending time with God is an important part of that journey, because you can't grow in relationship with someone that you never spend time with. And so we gave you a ton of different and creative ways that you can spend time with Jesus. But while spending time with Jesus is a crucial first step, it is not the only step we need to take. In fact, we need other people with us that help us grow closer to Jesus. We need to think about the people who are in our life and who we are journeying through life with, because other people have the impact and the power to change our faith. I know I said that you can choose the people that you journey with, but maybe you guys are feeling like, well, there's people and relationships that I have in my life that I can't really choose. Maybe you're thinking, I didn't choose my family. I didn't choose who I go to school with or who lives in my neighborhood. I don't even have a friend that I can count on, let alone several that I can choose to journey with. And maybe some of you guys are thinking, man, if I had a choice, I would choose differently. And you're right. We're kind of living in a season right now where we're experiencing the effect of the truth that we can't choose a lot of different things in our lives. And I understand why you might feel powerless to control or choose the people that are in your life. Like, you can't just make perfect friends appear out of thin air. You can't choose your family, but I think there is some truth to the fact that you can choose who you invest into, that you have the power and the opportunity to invest in a few certain people. And maybe you guys have experienced that. Maybe you have a couple close friends or people that you're like, yes, these are the people that I have spent a ton of time with and invested relationships into. But we want to encourage you, and I want to encourage you to, as you watch this video, to consider investing into relationships and into people who will help you in your walk with Jesus.
Proverbs 12:26 says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." And Proverbs 13:20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm."
Proverbs 12:26, "The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." And now Proverbs 13:20, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm."
So as those students just read, we hear in the book of Proverbs things that really aren't all that revolutionary. Like it kind of makes sense. It kind of speaks to the truth that who we surround ourselves with is generally who we're going to be. You guys know that as teenagers, your friends and who you surround yourself with are really, really influential in your life. And there's a lot of different ways that we kind of change that saying to say, like, well, show me your friends and I'll show you your future, or who you spend time with is who you become. And we become like the people we surround ourselves with. So it kind of makes sense that if we want to grow closer to Jesus, which again is the best adventure, the best way to spend our life, if we want to get closer to Jesus, then we have to choose to spend time and invest in people who will help us grow closer to Jesus.
Josh, do it now! David, try to... Nee!
You see, sometimes, as that video showed, there are bad friends. There are people in our lives potentially that have a bad influence on us. And the people we choose to have around us can impact our life in some pretty significant ways. It's pretty crazy that those friends just simply laughed at the guy as his car is driving by itself out onto the frozen lake, right? Like, whether it's the words we say, the things we watch, the way we treat people, or even the way we think about God and the way we live out our faith, the people in our lives have the power to lead us toward good, toward Jesus, or toward harm. You know, I'm thankful for some of the people who have been in my life because of the way that they impacted my faith. When I was in college, I had a mentor named Levi who really taught me what grace was and how to intentionally care for others. And he believed in me, he challenged me, he encouraged me, and he was in my life when I went through some pretty dark days. I was fortunate to have crossed paths with him when I did, but this relationship really was a choice. It was a relationship that I chose to invest in. That relationship helped me grow closer to Jesus in some pretty significant ways. But there was another relationship that helped me grow closer to Jesus as well, but it's a little surprising considering the scripture that we're going to read in just a second.
Mark 2:13-17. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners."
In high school, I developed a friendship with a guy named Greg. He was in my 7th hour Spanish class, but Greg was someone that I never really expected to be friends with because he was clearly a goth. You know, he dressed in all black clothes. He listened to hardcore metal and punk music. And he wouldn't be someone that I would consider a good influence. Yet Greg helped me grow in my relationship with Jesus in ways that I never really expected, because by befriending Greg, I entered into conversations that challenged what I believe and led me to live out the very things that Jesus commanded me to do. By becoming a friend with Greg, I became closer to Jesus through obeying his call to love everyone. And I saw God work in Greg and in my life in some incredible ways. This isn't a story to talk about how, well, God changed Greg's life and all this. No, none of that stuff really happened, although Greg did come to church with me a couple times. But the reality is that I developed this relationship and this friendship with Greg. I was kind of forced to come to grips with, man, maybe God also calls us to have intentional friendships and relationships with people who do not know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Mark chapter 2, verses 13-17. Once again, Jesus came beside the lake, and a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Upon hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinner."
And this becomes really, really tricky because we just talked about how God doesn't want to have us spend time around people who are going to be bad influences, yet Jesus hung out with people who clearly needed him. And so the reality is we are caught in this tension. We're caught in this tension of being around people who need Jesus, and we absolutely need to do that. But yet also being aware that we cannot make our closest friends, our closest confidants, people who don't know Jesus, because they're going to have an influence on us. And so that's what Jesus did perfectly, right? He had his disciples, he poured into them, invested in them, but he also hung around with these sinners and tax collectors and people that clearly didn't follow Jesus. And so his relationships with both groups of these people were a choice. He said, I'm going to intentionally live out. Why? To point both groups to the Father and to intentionally love and care for them. And I think that's what we are called to do as well. You see, on this adventure, on this journey with Jesus, we have other people that are in our life for a reason. And they are there to help us grow closer to Jesus, either by investing in us or we investing in them, or by sharing our faith and sharing the hope and love of Jesus with those who do not yet believe. But our relationships should not be an accident. Our relationships should be a choice. And it's who we invest in that have an impact on our life.
I'm going to be reading Mark 2:13-17. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at the table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners."
So how do we make sense of these two seemingly opposing messages? Right? How do we both surround ourselves with people who are Jesus followers and spend time with people who aren't? And how can both types of these relationships help us grow closer to God? That's the tension Jesus proposes, and one that we can embrace and consider. So here's a few questions that I want you to think about for a moment that you'll get a chance to discuss in just a second. First, why is it important to surround myself with people who follow Jesus? Why is it also important to have relationships with people who don't follow Jesus? How can close relationships with people who don't know Jesus help me grow closer to Jesus? And what are the dangers of having close relationships with people who don't follow Jesus? And how do I balance having relationships with people who know Jesus and people who don't? You see, every relationship that you have will impact your faith in some way. And so the question you need to answer is this: can this relationship help me grow closer to God or not? And so the reality is sometimes maybe our relationships with other believers should help us grow closer to Jesus, but are they? No, it's not not an indictment, it's not an accusation against Christians, but there are some times where we're like, you know what? Maybe this person, for whatever reason, I just need to back away from a little bit. But maybe our relationships with people who don't believe in Jesus can also get us closer to God, or they could do the opposite, right? This is the whole problem with relationships, is because they're with people, and people aren't perfect. People mess up. People are sinners. But yet Jesus still calls us to be invested and to be involved. And he holds out different standards for our relationships with Jesus followers than he does with those who don't follow Jesus. And the reality is that on this adventure, on this journey, that we are called to live in this tension every single day, to be in the world but not of the world, to care for those who God came and saved, but yet also to live differently, right? This is the whole challenge. And so that is why we need others to help us live this relationship with Jesus out every single day, especially right now in the midst of this season. We need others so desperately. So if you want to make it on this journey, this adventure of following Jesus, you need people to help join you on this journey. Who is going to help you on this journey of knowing and loving Jesus most?